Hi, my name is Elizabeth Reed. I'm doing my final literature summary PowerPoint presentation. The title is Quality of Life Concerns for Hospice Patients and Their Caregivers. The introduction, it starts out with 4 questions. Why the topic is important to me. I've put a quote from the article that I did choose to do most of my research from that talks about the World Health Organization's definition of palliative care and how it emphasizes the achievement of the best possible quality of life for patients and their families. I do think that hospice is a very hard job. I'm very interested in seeing how hospice really does affect quality of life. That's why I chose to do that as my research topic. I think it's really important to be able to provide that holistic care to patients at the end of their life and try to make their life at the end as positive as possible. Um, and why it's important to the public is the next question that goes along with death as a part of life. And it's important for the public to know. I think a lot of people are scared. They hear the word hospice and they instantly think that their loved one will pass away. Things will happen very quickly. Things will progress. It's a very scary word. I think the more knowledge that we can give the public, I think the less scary that hospice will be. And I think that they will be able to have more assistance and hopefully have a more positive experience through a difficult time. And I think if we can do that, that ultimately helps the quality of life. This slide here, it talks about why it's important to healthcare. I did put some quotes in here. I'm not going to read all of them, but the article that I chose to review, it talked about caregivers' expectations and what their views were on the care. There were basically 2 main themes that the author had derived. This quote here down at the bottom talks about how the family caregivers expressed that they felt it was beneficial for their relatives to be at home. And even though they were afraid, they wanted to help as much as they could. And so, this goes back to that quote in general, being able to understand why healthcare providers need to know this. I think it's really important as healthcare providers to know as much as possible about why hospice care is needed, why it's important, because once again, hospice is a scary word. If we can present that and make people, or at least, help people understand what it is and why it's there, I think that will help improve patients' quality of lives, and they'll have a more positive experience, and their caregivers, I think, will feel a little bit more at ease. And this goes to my question that I had formulated here. It says, for adult patients that have been diagnosed with a terminal illness and their caregivers, does having hospice benefit the patient and caregiver compared to receiving no assistance in relation to quality of life in the last 12 months? Typically, hospice, to qualify, it's 6 months or less. There are some patients that do get recertified. The government looks at that and they're not necessarily always happy with that. But I went ahead and I put in my question the last 12 months of life because cancer patients are known to be on hospice. I think a lot of people think of cancer when they think of hospice, but there are a lot of cardiac patients that goes, to our recent diets. But there's also Alzheimer's, dementia patients. And I think for caregivers and patients, that that have that diagnosis, I think it's very important for the caregivers to be able to have help, because that is such a hard thing to watch spiritually, emotionally, and just losing your loved ones slowly. I think it's very important that hospice is involved in that as much as possible. Um, there needs to be a lot of support, a lot of spiritual support via the chaplain. We also typically, hospices have bereavement coordinators. They can do pre-bereavement services, as well as after the patient passes, but they can assist with things that will help the caregiver. A lot of Alzheimer's patients, dementia patients, they are very slow to progress, but I definitely think that that is one major diagnosis that I feel is important. I did put a quote down here once again from my article that I did, take. It says, interestingly, most of the family caregivers said that the decision to care for their family member was made prior to receiving information about the existence of home care units. And this is a article based in Sweden, so they call their agencies units. Thus, they had expected to be responsible for the patient's care alone and were positively surprised when informed about the possibility of professional home care, although few seemed to understand what it implied at the time of hospital discharge. And I think, once again, I put that quote there because we're looking at how important that is when a caregiver is told that they're going to be able to receive assistance. Most people take their loved ones and they don't even think about needing help. They think that they are just going to have to do this on their own. And I want to go back to, some of our other questions in the introduction as far as healthcare. Why is it important for healthcare people to know about hospice and how it affects patients' quality of life? The last part of this quote, it says, although few seem to understand what it implied at the time of hospital discharge. I think that if we can start from that discharge point and have the nurses there be knowledgeable about hospice and what services can be offered, I think that will help with the consistency and the communication between, hospital discharge and hospice agencies, things like that. Because sometimes those communication barriers can make it very hard on the caregivers and the patients. So I think that whatever healthcare providers can do to assist, they should be able to. As a brand new nurse, I had no knowledge of hospice, no knowledge of anything, and I wish I would have. And that way, when I was faced with some of the situations I was in, I could have been of more assistance. So I started searching my results, and I used Medline with full text. The requirements were also to use search terms. I picked 3 search terms, including hospice, quality of life, and lack of assistance. I then combined them with my operators, which is and, or both. And I entered the questions hospice and quality of life and lack of assistance. And with these terms and the operators, I came to 41 results. So I think it's important. Our textbook mentions, I have a quote there about how overwhelming it can be if you're not specific enough. So I think that it's very important to really look at what you're asking in order to be able to get the best possible results and not be so scattered or overwhelmed, because if you start there and you already feel overwhelmed, it can be a little bit of a challenge. to keep positive about the process. So the next slide here, my searching continued. I narrowed the search results again by using certain criteria. So I chose articles with full text only so that I could have the entire article, which includes, the background and the literature review and the data results, so that I could see what the entire study found. I chose academic journals because I think that's pretty important. You want to have a reliable source, and academic journals typically publish research. And then I limited the publication dates to include articles published between 2002 and 2017, because typically the 10-year rule is what they use in healthcare, because it's always changing, it's always getting updated. So I went ahead and did that by time period as well. Excuse me. The articles that I chose, I kind of outlined here on a couple of slides. The first article I chose was more so about oncology, and that study was interesting, but it really touched base on the spiritual needs of patients, which I think is very important, and I do think that that's a big part of hospice, but I wanted to see more of the medical. The second article was more done in Botswana, and so that was a really good article, and I almost made that my first choice. I looked at it, and I thought it was very, very well done. I just was concerned because they do have poor quality of life anyway, and the article had said that having care really didn't help much, but that's because they were missing basic water, things like that. The third article was more about oncology as well. It was more statistical information than anything, so it was a pretty hard article to understand. I felt like I needed a little bit more knowledge. The fourth article was more so about stroke patients. The data was from 2003, so that's a little dated. The study is published in 2008, but the interesting thing about it is how the results were drawn, and I noted here that it possibly was skewed. And finally, the fifth article I chose, this is the one I chose my research topic on. It's based on cancer patients, and it's a qualitative study of hopes and expectations of family caregivers. So it talks about the caregivers, but it also talks about patients as well. I think it's really important to note that this talked mostly about quality of life compared to more of the other articles. So I think this was the best choice. And, in conclusion, like I had said, the last article really talked mostly about quality of life and how that was affected. I think the second article, the Botswana article, was very well done as well. But I really felt that this last article was very well written. And in conclusion, I just want to mention I didn't see a guideline for the particular article, and based on this topic, I don't think that we should change any of the practices. I think that we should try to continue to do everything that we are doing in order to help these patients. I would like to see, maybe with hospice benefits through insurance, I would like to see some private duty coverage as well, especially for the Alzheimer's and dementia patients, because that's really hard on their caregivers. So I would like to see something of that nature to be able to help them better. And this is a list of my references, and I just want to note that I have the textbook in there as well. So Thank you so much.